Hello, friend. I have a story to tell you today. It's the story of my daughter's life. She died of lung cancer at the age of 39, and I have written a book which I think is helpful to us today in the very difficult circumstances in which we live. It brings hope and encouragement and a sense that all is well. I hope you enjoy it. Episode 6. Brian cherishes a precious memory of 4-year-old Shirley, who is supposed to be following us to the car. She stops halfway down the path. We are already late, but she just stands there. Quite exasperated, he calls her to hurry. She looks at him, taken aback. "I'm looking at the rainbow," she explains. "Isn't God beautiful?" He also remembers her coming into his study, holding a fragile, broken plastic toy. "Fix it, Daddy," she pleads. He knows that there's no way he can. It's just too smashed up. His heart aches. The last thing he wants is to let her down, and he hopes she understands. Shirley's about 12 when her cat crawls into the lounge, very badly hurt. "Mom, you will fix my cat?" she asks, green-brown eyes round and pleading. Abby Cat lies under a lounge chair. I scoop the tabby up, ever so gently, onto a soft cushion. She whimpers in pain. Her back seems to be broken. The vet confirms that both hips are broken. He suggests an operation to put screws in. We know it's going to cost. The look in those large green-brown eyes makes any hesitation on our part impossible. We have just had a nice fat tax rebate. When we see the vet's bill, we joke, "The taxman giveth, but the vet taketh away." Sadly, as the baby grows become T-shirts and the T-shirts change sizes, a devastating misunderstanding grows between Shirley and her dad. She sees him as someone she just can't please. She always falls short of his expectations, and she's just not good enough to deserve his love. These most damaging beliefs play out as pain throughout the years to come. Worse, she comes to see God too as someone she just can't please, so she can't believe he loves her either. Year after year, Shirley becomes more disillusioned. For her, love becomes conditional. From there, it's a logical, sad, and inevitable step to conclude, "I'm just not lovable." Later, Shirley brings this need to please and meet others' expectations in the ways she relates to men. At one stage, her dad writes, "I know things haven't been right between us, and my heart is very sore about it. I have always loved you. There are times when I feel you're being so far away from us, almost with physical pain." Shirley understands love to have strings attached. It's always asking something from her. It certainly fails to satisfy the longing of her heart. I've experienced it too, so I understand. I know the emptiness. So does Brian. And to make things worse for him, he was only 2 when he lost his dad. Many times I missed the boat with Shirley. In 2012, at her counsellor's suggestion, Shirley listed in her diary some of the things that made her angry. Over 30 years later, I found out that she was angry with me for being in bed so often. "Why were you always sick, Mummy?" she asked when she was 4 or 5. "Are you going to die?" I can still see the very serious look on her little face as she stood in the doorway to our bedroom. We didn't want her to be an only child, and we were trying for another baby. This meant I often stayed in bed, hoping not to miscarry. What she saw was being abandoned if Mummy should die. Worse than that, because of her difficulties, she believed that such a thing would destroy her. "I'm really much, much better, you know," I tell her. "We are sometimes sick, but then we get better." I want her to come to me. I'm surprised when she walks off. My heart aches. I had no idea what was going through her head, what she was feeling. and I didn't know how to explain. How do you explain a possible miscarriage to a 5-year-old? So I did the best I could, but I knew I hadn't said the right thing, just knew it. And the consequences, the terror of that moment for her, stayed with her for more than 30 years. Shirley was also angry with me for walking out on her and her dad. Brian and I used to argue quite a bit. I don't think it was abnormal, but it was real and intense. One of us would storm off somewhere to fume and calm down. One time, on my way out, I couldn't get to Shirley to take her with me, but I comforted myself that surely she was all right because she was with her dad. As usual, Brian and I kissed and made up, and all was well, or so I thought. But 30 years later, Shirley wrote in her diary that Mum walked out on me and Dad. She was being abandoned, or so she thought, and was going to be destroyed by it. What I remember poignantly about our move to Cape Town was Shirley's deep withdrawal. We used to talk so much when she was little, but of late, long, uncomfortable silences have become part of our lives. I saw this in most of the teens I worked with. They talked passionately to each other, but talking to their parents was the pits. Perhaps, on top of that, my track record of misunderstanding had made Shirley angrier and angrier with me. Now, since she had left her friends behind, she talked to no one. Silence comes when pain curls you up in upon yourself. Was this another side to what was happening? When her pain was deep, did it scrunch her up out of reach? My not quite understanding why this move was such a disaster for her made it worse. I tried to encourage her with the prospect of new friends, when all she wanted was her old ones. A wonderful new youth group in one of the biggest and best churches, when all she wanted was our old little one. No wonder she stopped talking to me. I resisted for a long time, but eventually I listened to the advice of our new pastor. After all, he was well known and very popular. Many turned to him for advice. He believed Shirley was acting up because she was spoilt. I knew in my gut that he was wrong. This was something very different to that. But under all the pressure, I told Shirley to pull herself together and stop acting up. For years, I've been so sorry that I did that. Sorrier than I have been over most other things. How could I allow myself to be pushed? I instinctively knew she was in real trouble. And this time, more so, because a pastor was involved, it impacted her trust in God. Such an error on my part makes me wonder how much else I got wrong. It is true that sometimes the areas in which we are deficient and broken are the very areas where our children, perhaps others in their brokenness too, need us most. But getting it wrong is never what we intend. In 2001, I read a book about individual differences between children. I find a description that fits Shirley to a T. That's it, I say to myself. She's a grown-up, compassionate child, as fragile as burned china, but just as exquisite. I sit down to write. I want to uplift and encourage her. I want to help her to understand and appreciate herself better. Throughout her life, I've had glimpses of the unique beauty of her true nature. Sweetheart, I write, my book describes you as the most lovable, the gentlest compassion child. You are the most creative of people. You dream noble dreams and go off in your own wonderland of fantasy. I thrill that she's like this because I especially like these kinds of people. You truly, truly love people, detect their emotional needs, and can't bear anyone to be hurting. You're an excellent listener with a depth of empathy. You're also hell-bent on rescuing and relieving others of pain. You need us to love you as deeply as you love. You can be so full of fun with a sense of humor to die for. I'm writing this to tell you I celebrate and salute you and thank God for the privilege of knowing you. But I also need her to understand you're also the most vulnerable to hurt. The rough world we live in makes you insecure and fearful. Thanks, Mum, she responds. University life begins for Shirley in February 1993 in beautiful Stellenbosch. The historic town nestles against mauve-grey peaks. Red and white roses fringe the vineyards. Often weeks go by when I don't hear from Shirley, so when Lauren, her flatmate, and I do coffee, I ask a lot of questions. "Oh, Thigh," Lauren says, "we laughed such a lot. What an amazing sense of humour. And we went to all the students' events advertised in the Nielsen. The other thing we did was sleep, or at least Shirley did. I had to work my butt off, but she would hardly open a book and still cream her subjects. I found it so frustrating to watch." Lauren frowns. One thing Shirley really hated was to take Prozac. Because of her struggles to settle in after our move, our GP prescribed Prozac for 2 years. It helped a great deal, but left Shirley shocked. What was worse, that he then sent her for counselling. These two things stirred up and added to buried fears. It was not long before she was thinking, "There you are. I always knew it. There's something very wrong with me." She went on. "I was sure that God loves everyone in a general sort of way, because after all, He's good. But somehow I managed to miss discovering how very much God loves me. My childhood years had tattooed me with Christianity. It seems that, instead of setting me free, my faith was what was causing me feelings of failure, guilt, and unworthiness. After a long struggle, I decided the logical thing to do was to leave the church and religion behind. It encourages me that, while she's in Stellenbosch, phone calls home become pretty rare. This feels normal, as I think normal should be. I dream of seeing Shirley standing firmly on her own 2 feet, happy and fulfilled in her relationships, flourishing and healed. When she does come to Cape Town for weekends, not too often, she borrows my car. She drives the little grey fox off into the night. It's definitely best not to ask where she's going. Those are the nights when Brian and I lie in bed restlessly listening for every car. Eventually, at 3 or 4 in the morning, she turns in at the gate. God knows, I too really need encouragement. Am I doing the right thing by her? I'm trying so hard. Then I get a phone call. In 2005, I had been training teachers in Johannesburg. I had shared with my hostess, Paula, my ongoing deep concern for Shirley. Now Paula says, "I think I have a message for you. God seems to be saying, I know the deep anguish of your heart over Shirley. Hush, be still. I have her gently in the palm of my hand." Oh, wow. I've been reading from my book, Mum, Please Help Me Die, the story of my daughter Shirley's battle with cancer. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, please contact me. You can do that at the following email address, thigh@mumpleasehelpmedie.co.za. I hope you'll be with me again next week. Goodbye.